A security guard puts his hand up in front of a man in a worn barn coat at the entrance to a film premiere and tells him he is not getting in. Not because his ticket wasn't real. Not because he'd done anything wrong. Because he had shown up without a limousine, without a publicist, without an entourage, in old clothes, on foot, and the guard, holding a clipboard he took very seriously, decided that a man who arrives like that could not possibly belong at a night like this. The man did not argue. He did not say the one sentence that would have ended it instantly. He looked at the guard for a moment, nodded once, said no problem, and walked to the back of the long public line to wait his turn like everybody else. He waited 40 minutes. He was still waiting when the theater manager came running out onto the sidewalk in a panic, because the screening could not begin, because the one person the entire evening had been built around was nowhere to be found. The man in the barn coat, standing patiently near the front of the ordinary line by then, was the director of the film. It was his premiere. His name was on the marquee, and a historic theater full of famous people was about to learn that the guest of honor had spent 40 minutes waiting in the cold 40 feet from a red carpet laid out entirely for him, rather than embarrass the guard who told him he didn't belong. There is a theater on Broadway in downtown Los Angeles called the Palace. It opened in 1911, and it is one of the oldest surviving theaters in the country. All gilded plaster and painted ceilings and a marquee that spills gold light out onto a sidewalk that has seen 100 years of premieres. On this particular Thursday night in October, the marquee read one thing: The Night People, a film by Marcus Rourke. The red carpet ran 40 feet from the curb to the doors. There were photographers 3 deep behind the ropes. There were black cars idling down the block, each one holding someone whose face you would know. There were publicists with earpieces, and a step-and-repeat wall, and a line of ticket holders. Real people, the public, who had won seats through a lottery the production had insisted on, stretching down the block into the dark. Everyone was waiting for Marcus Rourke. If you had watched movies in the last 20 years, you knew the name. The quiet one. The reluctant hero. The man who did the hard right thing at the worst possible cost to himself. But for the last 3 years, Marcus hadn't been acting. He'd been making something. He had spent his own money, a great deal of it, to direct a documentary nobody had asked him to make, about the people who keep a city running while it sleeps. The overnight nurses, the office cleaners, the bus drivers on the 2 a.m. routes, the security guards standing alone in empty lobbies at 4 in the morning, the invisible ones, the night people. He had spent 3 years trying to make the world look at the people it walks past, and on the night his film about them finally premiered, he did the most Marcus Rourke thing imaginable. He told his driver to let him out 4 blocks early. He put on an old barn coat over his shirt. He sent his team ahead without him. And he walked to his own premiere on foot, alone, in the dark, because he wanted, just once, just for a few minutes, to arrive at the palace the exact way the people in his film would have arrived. Unnoticed, unannounced, nobody special. He got his wish. The guard who stopped him was named Frank Doyle, and to understand what he did that night, you have to understand 56 years of being invisible, because Frank did not stop that man out of cruelty. He stopped him out of a wound so old he had stopped being able to feel it as a wound at all. Frank had worked security his whole life: malls, warehouses, office towers, parking structures, and now special events, filling in on nights like this one. 31 years of standing in doorways. 31 years of being the man people's eyes slide right past on their way to somewhere that matters. He had held 10,000 doors and been thanked, he sometimes figured. Maybe a few hundred times. He had spent whole 8-hour shifts in marble lobbies where not one human being said a single word to him. He was, professionally and permanently, furniture, the thing you don't see until you need it moved. His father had been the same. A night watchman at a lumber yard for 26 years. A quiet man who left for work when Frank was going to bed and came home when Frank was leaving for school, so that Frank grew up knowing his father mostly by the sound of the screen door and the smell of the man's coat. When his father died, the lumber yard sent a card. The pension was almost nothing. The name that had guarded that yard for 26 years was painted over on the little office door within a month. And that was the whole record that Frank's father had ever existed at all. Frank had sworn, somewhere in there, that he would matter more than that. That he wouldn't just be the door. And the truth he never said out loud, the truth that ran underneath everything he did, was that he never quite managed it. He was 56, and he was still standing in a doorway. And the world still walked past him like he was made of the same brick as the wall. But not tonight. Tonight Frank Doyle had a clipboard and a list, and for a few hours, the shining people getting out of the black cars had to stop in front of him. They had to say their names to him. They had to wait while he ran his finger down the page and decided, with a nod or a shake of his head, whether they got to walk through the doors into the gold light. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Frank Doyle was not the furniture. He was the gate. And some starved thing in him had been waiting his whole life to be the one who decides. So when a man in a beat-up barn coat came walking up the sidewalk on foot, no car, no name tag, no entourage, no urgency, just an ordinary tired-looking guy drifting toward the entrance like the rules didn't apply to him. Every one of Frank's 56 years stood up at once. Because that, right there, was the exact way the world had always walked past Frank. Like he wasn't there, like the door was nobody's to guard. And Frank Doyle decided, in that instant, that he was not going to be walked past. Not tonight. Not by this guy. Not ever again. He put his hand up. "Hold on," Frank said. "Where do you think you're going?" Marcus stopped. "In," he said, easily, nodding toward the doors. "For the screening." "You got a ticket?" "I do." Marcus started to reach into the barn coat. "You on the list?" Frank had already lifted the clipboard between them like a shield. "Because this is a private event, sir. Invitation and credentials only for this entrance." "I don't know you." There it was. "I don't know you." Frank said it the way a man says a thing he has been on the wrong end of 10,000 times and is finally, gloriously, getting to say himself. Marcus looked at him. And here is the thing the people who were there would remember. He did not get annoyed. He did not pull out his phone. He did not say the name that was printed 20 feet above both their heads in letters 4 feet tall. He looked at Frank Doyle standing there with his clipboard raised like it was the only thing he had, and something moved across Marcus's face that was almost recognition. Like he'd met this exact man 100 times, in 100 lobbies, at 4 a.m, with a camera on his shoulder. "Where should I go?" Marcus asked, not sharp, just genuine. "Is there another entrance?" "General admission lines down the block," Frank said, and pointed. "Back of it. They'll let you in when they let you in, if there's room." "Okay," Marcus said. "Thank you." And he turned, and he walked down the sidewalk, past 40 feet of red carpet laid out for him. Past the photographers who did not glance up because they did not know to, past the step-and-repeat wall with his own film's title printed on it 100 times, and he took his place at the very back of the long public line of ordinary ticket holders. And he waited. He could have ended it with one sentence. Everyone who later heard the story got stuck on the same impossible detail, that he had the sentence right there in his mouth. "I'm Marcus Rourke. This is my film." And he swallowed it. Because saying it would have made Frank Doyle small, would have turned the guard in front of a whole sidewalk of people into the idiot who blocked the director from his own premiere. And Marcus had just spent 3 years of his life making a movie about how it feels to be made small. He was not about to do it to a man on a night like this. So he stood in the cold in his barn coat, 40 people back, and he waited. The line was full of night people. That was the thing about the lottery the production had fought so hard for. The seats hadn't gone to influencers. They'd gone to the kind of people the film was actually about, and the kind of people who cared enough to enter a drawing to see a documentary about their own lives. The woman in front of Marcus was a retired hospital custodian who'd worked the overnight floor cleaning shift at County Usk for 22 years. The man behind him drove a night bus, and directly beside Marcus, having sidled over from the next spot in line, was a 19-year-old named Camila. Camila's mother cleaned office buildings downtown between the hours of 10 at night and 6 in the morning, and had for Camila's entire life. And Camila had saved for 6 weeks to buy a ticket the moment she saw the trailer, because the trailer had shown, for 4.5 seconds, a woman who looked like her mother pushing a cart through a dark, empty office at 3 a.m. And Camila had watched a stranger in a movie theater actually stop scrolling and look, and she had cried in a way she didn't fully understand. She wanted to make films. She had told exactly one person that, ever, because everyone she'd ever mentioned it to had smiled at her the way you smile at a kid who says she wants to be an astronaut. She was talking to the tired man in the barn coat beside her, the way you talk to a stranger in a long line when she stopped mid-sentence. She really looked at his face, and her eyes went enormous. Marcus caught it, and he smiled, small and crooked, and put one finger very briefly to his lips. Camila closed her mouth. Her heart was going like a drum. She looked from his face to the marquee blazing his name over the street, to the empty red carpet he was standing 40 feet away from, back to his face, and she understood all at once what she was looking at. And she did the thing he'd asked with her eyes. She kept his secret. She stood next to Marcus Rourke in the general admission line and told him, in a whisper, about her mother. And he listened the way you listen to someone you've decided deserves to be heard. And she would remember that 10 minutes for the rest of her life. Up at the doors, meanwhile, quiet panic had begun. The screening was supposed to start at 8. It was 8:20. The director had not walked the carpet. His team was inside, assuming he was doing press somewhere. The theater manager, a young woman named Priya, running the biggest night of her career, was on her radio hissing, "Has anyone got eyes on Rourke? Anyone? He's not backstage. He's not in the green room. Where is he?" When one of Marcus's producers said the last thing anyone wanted to hear, that Marcus had let his car go early, blocks away, because he'd said something about wanting to walk in like a regular person, Priya went cold. And then she started walking fast down the sidewalk, scanning the public line, praying, and about 2/3 of the way down, 40 feet from a red carpet built entirely for him, she found the guest of honor of the Los Angeles premiere of The Night People, standing quietly in the cold, in an old barn coat, listening to a 19-year-old girl talk about her mother. "Mr. Rourke," Priya breathed. And every head in the line turned. It moved down the sidewalk like a current. The name. Rourke, that's Marcus Rourke. In the line. He's been in the line. Phones came up. The photographers at the carpet turned as one animal and started running toward the ordinary line, and the whole careful machinery of the premiere lurched 40 feet sideways, to where a man in a barn coat was gently telling Priya it was fine. Everything was fine. He was happy where he was. And up at the entrance, Frank Doyle heard the name too. He heard it, and he watched the crowd surge toward the man he had sent to the back of the line 40 minutes ago, and he watched the photographers aim their cameras at the tired guy in the barn coat. And he looked up, slowly, with a terrible dawning, at the marquee blazing over his own head. A film by Marcus Rourke. And then back down at the man. And the clipboard in Frank Doyle's hands began, very slightly, to shake. He had not blocked a gatecrasher. He had blocked the reason the gate existed. Marcus saw Frank see it. He saw the color drain out of the guard's face, saw the man's whole rigid body go loose with horror, and Marcus did the thing that told you everything about him. He did not look triumphant. He looked concerned. He put a hand up to slow the photographers, and he raised his voice just enough to carry back to the doors, not to accuse, but to protect. "Hey, nobody's in trouble," Marcus called out. "You hear me?" That man was doing his job. He was doing it exactly right. You don't let people in without checking. That's the whole point of the job. He was already walking back up the sidewalk toward the entrance, toward Frank, and the crowd parted for him. He did nothing wrong. Nothing. He reached Frank Doyle, who looked like a man waiting to be executed, and Marcus stuck out his hand. "Marcus," he said, like they were meeting fresh. "I'm sorry. I should have just told you. That was on me, walking up like that. You had no way to know." Frank stared at the hand. "Mr. Rourke, I sent you to the back of the line." At your own, his voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I didn't. You should have said. Why didn't you say?" And Marcus said the sentence that was the whole reason the story got told. "Because you'd have felt like this," he said quietly, nodding at Frank's stricken face. "And I didn't want you to feel like this. Not tonight." He kept his hand out. "Come on. Shake my hand. And then, if you can get somebody to cover the door, I want you to come inside. There's something I need you to see." Frank got someone to cover the door. And Marcus Rourke walked his own security guard down his own red carpet, past the exploding cameras, with a hand on the man's shoulder, and instead of taking his seat up front with the famous people, he walked Frank to a quiet spot at the side of the grand old lobby, under the painted ceiling, where the two of them could talk before the film began. "I didn't bring you in here to make you feel worse," Marcus said. "I want you to understand that." He looked at the guard, at the sharp uniform and the clipboard the man was still, somehow holding. "A guy doesn't take a door that seriously for no reason, Frank. You held that entrance like it was the most important thing in the world. Nobody does that unless a door has meant something to them their whole life. So what's the story? Who taught you what a door is worth?" And Frank Doyle, who had never told this to anyone, told a movie star in a lobby full of gold light. He told him about his father. The night watchman. 26 years at the lumber yard, the screen door and the smell of the coat and the name painted over within a month. He told him about 31 years of his own doorways, 31 years of being furniture, of eyes sliding past him, of holding 10,000 doors and being thanked a few hundred times. He told him how he'd sworn as a kid that he'd matter more than a painted-over name on an office door, and how he was 56 and standing in a doorway and hadn't managed it, not really, not once. And then tonight, Frank said, and his voice was raw, for a few hours, people had to stop in front of me. They had to know they had to wait on me. And you came walking up like I was nothing, like the door was nobody's. Same as everybody's looked at me my whole life. And I couldn't. He stopped. He pressed the clipboard to his chest. I couldn't be walked past one more time. So I did to you the one thing that's been done to me every day of my life. I looked at a man and decided he didn't matter. He shut his eyes. God. And it was you. Marcus did not interrupt. He let it all land. Then he told Frank something true about himself. I know what it is to feel invisible, he said. Sounds crazy, my face on the side of a building. But there's a kind of invisible that's about being seen too much, and known not at all. I spent years thinking if enough people looked at me, I'd stop feeling like nobody was actually there. Didn't work. The looking's not the same as the seeing. Took me a long time to learn that. He paused. It's the whole reason I made this movie, Frank. 3 years of my life. You want to know what it's about? They said, night workers. Frank managed. It's about your father, Marcus said gently. It's about the night watchman with the painted-over name. It's about the man who guards the door his whole life and never gets thanked. I made a 2-hour film to walk into a theater full of the most looked-at people in the world and make them sit in the dark and finally see the guy at the door. He let that sit. Then, he asked the question he'd brought Frank into that lobby to ask. Your dad, 26 years, and a card and a painted-over name. If someone had made a film about him, if the whole world had to sit down and look at what he gave, what would that have been worth? To him? To you? Frank Doyle put his face in his hands. That was the beat. The whole thing turned on it. I'm not asking you for anything, Marcus said, standing. I'm just asking you to come sit down, front row, next to me, and watch a movie I think you already know by heart. And then I'm going to walk you up on that stage after, in front of every famous person in this room, and I'm going to tell them that the man who guards the door is the reason I made the whole thing. Because he is. You're not the guy who blocked me tonight, Frank. You're the guy the movie's for. They went in. Marcus Rourke sat in the front row of his own premiere with a security guard beside him, and the lights went down, and the night people began. And Frank Doyle watched 2 hours of his own life play across a 40-foot screen. He watched a night nurse hold a stranger's hand at 4 a.m. He watched an office cleaner move through a dark tower alone, humming to herself, invisible to the day that would never know her name. He watched, near the end, a segment about the men who guard the empty places while the world sleeps, and he watched a title card, white on black, that Marcus had put there 3 years before he ever met Frank, that read simply, for the ones who hold the door. Frank cried in the dark and did not pretend he wasn't. When it ended, and the lights came up, and the room stood, an entire theater of famous, guarded, overlooked-at people on their feet, Marcus walked to the microphone at the front, and he did exactly what he'd promised. He said that 3 years ago he'd set out to make the invisible visible, and that tonight, on the way in, the universe had handed him the most perfect proof he could have asked for that the film needed to exist, and he told them, briefly and without cruelty, the whole story of the barn coat and the back of the line. And then he said, "So I want you to meet the man who did his job so well that he wouldn't even let the director in. This is Frank. Come up here, Frank." And he brought Frank Doyle up onto the stage. And the applause that started in that theater was not led, and did not need to be led, and it did not stop for a long time. And near the back a 19-year-old named Camila stood clapping with tears running straight down her face, because she had watched a man refuse to make another man small, and she had decided, right there, that this was the thing she wanted to spend her life making. Marcus paid the guards overtime out of his own pocket that night and tipped it tenfold, and asked that no mention of it be made. Then he shook Frank's hand once more, and he found Camila in the crowd and pressed something into her palm, a card with a number on it. and told her to call it. And then he slipped out a side door into the ordinary dark, on foot, the way he'd come. And he was gone before most of the room understood that the best part of the evening had already left. He was always gone before the credit arrived. That was the thing about Marcus. Here's the part the story usually skips. The slow part, the true part. It did not fix Frank Doyle overnight. Nothing fixes a man overnight. For a couple of weeks he was quiet and strange, turning the whole night over. But some things had started to move that couldn't be stopped. The clip of Marcus bringing the guard on stage went around the world, and for a few days Frank Doyle was famous, which he hated. And then the fame faded the way it does. And what was left underneath it was the thing that actually mattered. Frank had watched a room full of the most looked-at people alive get to their feet for a man who holds a door. And he could not go back to believing that the door didn't matter. He started saying good evening to every single person who walked through his, by name when he knew it. He learned the names. He learned that the woman who cleaned the tower he guarded was named Rosa and had 3 kids. And that the man who emptied the bins was studying for the bar, and within a year Frank Doyle knew every night person in that building, and every night person in that building knew Frank. And the loneliest job in the city had quietly become, for a whole shift of invisible people, the warmest room they passed through all night. And he did one more thing. He drove out to the old lumber yard, which was a self-storage place now. And he found the little office door, and he asked the manager if he could put something on it. And he mounted a small brass plate, paid for out of his own pocket. That read, Walter Doyle guarded this ground faithfully for 26 years. He is remembered. It is still there. Frank goes by sometimes to polish it. Camila called the number. It was Marcus's foundation. Within a year she had a scholarship and a mentor and a camera that was actually hers, and 3 years after the night she stood next to a stranger in a barn coat, Camila premiered her own first short film, 19 minutes, shot entirely between midnight and dawn, about a woman who cleans office buildings downtown while her daughter sleeps. Her mother sat in the front row. Camila dedicated it, on the card at the end, to the man in the line who told me to keep a secret, and then handed me my whole life. Years later, an interviewer asked Marcus Rourke about the premiere and the guard and the 40 minutes in the cold. He looked, by all accounts, almost puzzled, like he had to reach back for it. Then, he shrugged. He guarded that door like his father's whole life depended on somebody finally taking it seriously, Marcus said. I wasn't going to be the one to tell him it didn't matter. It's the only thing that does. And he moved on to the next question, because he was, as ever, already gone before the credit arrived. I have told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one, and I've thought a long time about why, and I don't think it's the reveal. The manager running down the sidewalk, the name moving through the line, the guard looking up at the marquee. That part's wonderful. I won't pretend it isn't. That's the part we click for, but the part I actually keep is the sentence he swallowed. He had the words right there. This is my film, let me in. And he didn't say them. Because saying them would have made a lonely man feel like a fool on the one night that man got to feel like he mattered. Think about what it takes to stand in the cold for 40 minutes rather than deal one small blow to a stranger's pride. Most of us can't do that for people we love. He did it for a guard he'd known for 90 seconds. So here's the question the story left me with, and I don't have a clean answer for it. We spend so much of our lives wanting to be seen, and the person right in front of us, the one holding the door, ringing us up, cleaning the room after we leave, is usually just as hungry for it as we are, and just as invisible to us as we feel to everyone above us. Would I have swallowed that sentence? Would you? On a cold night, tired 40 feet from where we were supposed to be? Honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. And maybe that's the thing worth carrying out of that line, that the people guarding the doors of our lives are somebody's whole world, and it costs us almost nothing to let them know we see them. This story is fictional, inspired by the quiet kind of decency the best people are known for, the kind that would rather wait in the cold than make a stranger feel small. If it got to you, do me a favor down in the comments. Don't just say great story. Tell me about someone in your life who holds a door the world walks past, the night worker, the janitor, the guard, someone you want to make sure gets seen tonight. I read every one. They're the best part of this, and if you know someone who's been feeling invisible lately, send them this. It might be the exact thing they need to hear today. If you're new here, subscribe. There's another story coming, and I'd be glad to have you for it. See you in the next one.